Today there was an inquiry in Victoria where Daniel Andrews had to answer some questions about hotel quarantine. You've heard a lot about this tonight. It was done over Zoom, which is exactly what the hotel inquiry could also be doing. But of course that's delayed for 6 weeks because they want the ultimate report to be delayed for another 6 weeks during, among other things, the lockdown, meaning of course when everyone's out of the 6-week lockdown, thank you Chairman Dan, the report comes out and of course he begins to slide. But someone is telling lies because it all comes down to, or well many things come down to one central point, one clear fact. This is what Daniel Andrews said today in this very inquiry into hotel quarantine and the use of the Australian Defence Force. Have a look at this tape.
So my question is, why did you choose to use private security guards rather than police or ADF?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the use of ADF. I don't believe ADF support was on offer. And ADF support has been provided in very limited circumstances in New South Wales, not to provide security as such, but to provide transportation from the airport to hotels. So again, I think it is fundamentally incorrect to assert that there was hundreds of ADF staff on offer and somehow someone said no.
Well, I repeat, someone's telling lies, because this is what the Australian Defence Minister put out today, a statement that she released to the media giving us a whole bunch of dates and details that are very different than what Chairman Dan is presenting. For example, on March the 28th, Victorian authorities advised that Victoria was not seeking ADF assistance and in its mandatory quarantine arrangements. So they said they didn't need the Defence Force. The only problem is, the day before, on March the 27th, this statement was being made available by the Premier of Victoria. This statement in particular is fascinating because in it there's a line. A day before, apparently the ADF weren't needed. It's also been agreed that the Australian Defence Force will be engaged to support the implementation of these arrangements, that being hotel quarantine. Back to the Defence Minister and her statement of the past couple of days, where she today released this, that on the 12th of April, Victorian authorities reaffirmed to ADF officials that quarantine compliance monitoring operations were with Victorian authorities. On the 24th of June, Defence agreed to a Victorian government request of 850 ADF personnel. This is after the second wave was beginning. But then the request was withdrawn by the Victorian government the following day on June 25. The decision to withdraw the request is a matter for the Victorian government. Let's be nice and clear here. The Premier of Victoria said today before a parliamentary inquiry that the ADF essentially weren't offered. And if the ADF were offered, it was only for logistical things like transport. When, as I've just shown you, when the things started to get wrong the second time around, 850 personnel were not going to be involved in transport. They were going to be involved in the security arrangements and implementation of hotel quarantine, like it has worked successfully in places like New South Wales. Now, I know to some I might seem a little bit old school, but I live in the world where I remember the Premier of New South Wales had to resign because reality didn't match up with what he told an independent commission against corruption. Barry O'Farrell was a good man, a good Premier. He built the foundations of a government that will be there for a very long time in New South Wales. But he had to resign because he forgot the bottle of Grange. What does Daniel Andrews have to do when he just tells an outright lie about the Defence Forces? His own press release said that the ADF was going to be involved. A day later, the ADF was told don't turn up. Weeks later, they asked for 850 people from the ADF. The next day they say, no, we don't need you. Were Victoria Police the ones who ended up doing the guarding? No. The private security guards did. That's where the second wave began. But I hate to tell you this. He's probably going to get away with it. Because this is an opinion poll that was released today by, yes, the left-leaning Essential organisation. And while finally we don't have a majority of Victorians who believe that the handling has been good, it's gone down from 72% to now only 49%. When asked what is the number one issue in Australia right now, 62% of people said that stopping community transmission of COVID as soon as possible is the number one issue. In Victoria alone, where not even half of the state is happy with the government and says they're doing a poor job, well, guess what happens? 72% agree with the curfew, 71% agree with only one person per household being able to go and buy groceries, 70% agree that most shops should close and restrict operations of many other businesses. 70% of people agree in banning people from travelling more than 5 kilometres from their house. So while the very reason for all of these things to be put in place is because of the actions of the Victorian government, they are still thankful for the actions that are being taken that are necessary because of the Victorian government. That's how he'll slide. That's the Stockholm Syndrome. Put that together with a media that doesn't want to talk about it, wants to move on, wants to talk about anything but hotel quarantine. Even when a nurse was blowing the whistle as she was yesterday, they didn't even ask him about it. And nobody even bothered to point out the obvious mistruth that was told today before that parliamentary inquiry. Sworn evidence. When it was the New South Wales Premier and it was a bottle of wine, he had to go. When it's the Victorian Premier and it's the use of the ADF in hotel quarantine that is the source of the virus's second wind that has now gone on to kill hundreds of people in Victoria, he'll keep skating. Because one more bit of polling that means he'll try to bat this one out, and most likely with the help of the media he'll be able to do it. About hotel quarantine. 56% of people say that the problem isn't the government, the problem isn't the decisions. Instead, it is mostly the individuals being irresponsible. So forget the fact of who hired the security guards, forget the fact of why the security guards were needed in the first place, forget the rejection of the ADF, forget the failure of the use of the police force. It's all really the dirty security guards' fault. 44% of people, a minority, say that it's about failures in the system. Daniel Andrews is going to get away with this. And he'll be cheered on, most likely, despite the fact that his decisions, his government's decisions, have locked you up for 6 weeks, have destroyed an economy, and lots of people have died. This is truly bizarre. And yet again, today, was the announcement made about how many people had died by the Premier? No, it was done before 9 o'clock, again on Twitter. And because too many people are okay with this bloke is going to slide. But no matter how popular this person is, they are not kings. They can be questioned, and we will continue to do so, even if the ultimate result might be heartbreaking for those families who have lost their member forever.